Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the technical delay. My name is Eric Esteves. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine. And if you came in a little late, you can put your info in the chat just to introduce who you are. Again, I'm Eric. I'm the Executive Director of the Lenny Zakim Fund. So I just want to thank you all for being here. So today is just a brief info session on our grants process and all that it entails. So I'm also joined by my colleague, Dominique Ramos, who's a part of our team. We have a pretty small team here at the Zakim Fund that really focuses on our grant-making efforts. So wanted to provide you all with a little bit of context and an overview about what we're all about. So the Lenny Zakim Fund is named after and was started by Lenny Zakim. Feel free to raise your hand if you've ever driven across the Lenny Zakim Bridge, crossing over from Charlestown, Cambridge area into downtown Boston. But it's named after the same man. He was a local activist and civil rights leader. He was the head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League here in New England. He was just very active in building bridges, which hence why he has a bridge named after him. And the fund was really started as a way to redirect money that was intended to honor him and really was redirected to support small grassroots nonprofits. So that's what we've continued to do for the last 26 years, since 1995. Unfortunately, Lenny passed away in 1999, but his legacy lives on through the fund. And really our focus is on social, racial, and economic justice. So what that means is we fund a range of small organizations that span 7 different funding areas. And they all are a mouthful, but I'll read each of them. They include access to food, housing, and economic security, child and youth development and education, civil and human rights advocacy and support, health promotion and accessibility for all, LGBTQ community support and organizing and support for immigrants and refugees, and lastly, violence prevention, criminal justice reform, and family outreach. So it could sound like we fund everything under the sun, but we don't necessarily fund everything under the sun, just under the moon. But those are the funding areas that we support. In terms of who the organizations are that we support, so you may have heard me say that they really are small grassroots nonprofits. That is our sweet spot. We really focus on organizations led by people from the communities they're serving and impacting. Organizations typically have small budgets. Many are just getting off the ground. Some are fiscally sponsored because it's really just an idea or program. But we do have a maximum budget size. So that's one of the big things with us. Unfortunately, we have to be restrictive in some ways. So our maximum budget size is $350,000. So the organization that's applying can't be larger than that. And then really our work does focus mainly on Eastern Massachusetts. And that really was by nature of pre-pandemic proximity. We do a lot of workshops and trainings, and people would come to those workshops and trainings. So we are not opposed to supporting organizations in Western Mass, but that's typically been our main catchment area so far. And then lastly, we fund organizations that really have a need and interest in engaging with professional development. We offer at least a dozen workshops or seminars throughout the course of a year, separated into a spring and fall season. And those run the full gamut. And they include things like financial management, fundraising, communications, HR, human resources, board governance, board recruitment. So it's a full range of nonprofit management workshops and topics that we offer to really help strengthen your organization so that you can then become more efficient so that you can focus on your programming. So that's really the goal, to help you be more efficient, to focus more on your programming. Our grants. So we have guidelines on our website, and you'll receive some information. You may have already gotten it, which is how you registered for this today. Our guidelines, we try to be pretty concise with it. I think it was 4 pages or less, but really our grants, they range in size between $1,000 to $20,000. $20,000 is our maximum grant size per year. And on average, typically newer applicants, the average grants are closer to 10,000 because we have a 5-year window. So organizations are eligible for up to 5 years of renewable funding or continuation funding. And usually, other than exceptional circumstances, typically that funding is typically renewed. And all of our grants typically are for general operating support. So that means it's unrestricted. We don't limit you. You don't have to develop a program budget when applying to us. You can describe all of the different programs or highlight a specific program, but our grants are general operating support, so unrestricted, and there aren't any kind of specific reporting requirements about a segment of your budget. You can report on your whole budget. Now, unfortunately, some of the things that we can't fund, this is kind of our disclaimer. We don't support conferences, sponsorships for fundraising events or other one-time events, film, video, or print projects. We don't fund individual requests, research and development or planning grants. And lastly, we don't support capital campaigns. So we try to be pretty nimble and responsive, but we can't support everything. So those are the list of the things we don't fund. But the other thing that we do offer, which I mentioned a little bit already, is that we offer capacity building support. So that capacity building support primarily serves in the form of professional development and training. We offer, as I mentioned, a slate of workshops each year. If you are familiar with us, you may have noticed in the last few years during the pandemic, we've started using YouTube. So some of our trainings are recorded. So we're building out an archive of trainings that are offered free of charge to the nonprofit community. And the other thing that we've done more recently is expanded it so that it's available to more than just the organizations that are receiving grants. Even those who are interested in applying for a grant or just want to learn more and maybe too big for us or not ready to apply for a grant are still able to participate and benefit from the trainings that we offer. And the trainings are all provided free of charge. The other thing we do have is a partnership where we can try to connect you with pro bono legal services for if there are specific needs that arise or questions, connecting organizations with legal help. And then mentoring and coaching and networking. So the networking I'll do first is we try to be intentional in connecting organizations to each other. So many of you here, part of us asking you to introduce yourselves in the chat is so that you can just see who else exists, I see folks who are in Needham here today in this info session, folks from Boston, from Worcester, from Somerville, from Martha's Vineyard, from Somerville, checking the list, Dorchester, right? So really it's an opportunity for organizations to connect with each other. You may be under the same funding area. You may be both youth serving or youth development and education. You may realize and discover another organization serving an immigrant population very similar to yours, and there may be an opportunity for collaboration. So we don't force collaboration, but we certainly try to provide opportunities, both formal and informal, for organizations and community leaders to connect with each other. And then the mentoring and coaching piece, Dominique and myself are the primary resources. So we often receive emails and questions from nonprofits asking about a wide variety of things, whether it's, do you have referrals for us for strategic planning or for fundraising? Can you help us think through this issue that we're trying to solve? So there's a ton of opportunities for us to connect with you and help answer your questions. And we try to answer them to the best of our ability, or refer you on to someone who may be more better equipped to answer those questions. And then also, you'll see here, there's a note that says for all current and former grantee partners. So that all of these capacity building supports are provided for those who receive funding, but also once you have been funded by the ZACM Fund, you're ZACM Fund for life, essentially. You're a part of the community as a whole. So you may have noticed we have over 400 organizations and nonprofits that have been funded by us over the years, many of whom consider themselves alumni. Some have grown and become much larger nonprofits. One example of that is Partners in Health, which is much larger than all of us combined right now. But we were one of their early funders when they were just getting off the ground. But there are tons of other organizations that are still the same size and are still kind of just plugging away, focusing on the small community and impact and need that they have always served. So we also don't force scale on anyone. If you have a desire to grow, we try to help get you where you want to go. If you really want to just focus on impact, we try to help you focus on that impact. So the grant application process, just to walk you through our timeline. As you know, the applications are due September 1st. I think the specific date is maybe the 2nd or something like that, but we try to make that consistent. Early September is our deadline. And then our review stage is September and October. And then we do what we call site visits, both full and partial, in November and December. So essentially there are 2 windows when you're notified of your status. After you apply, you'll likely, organizations that don't make it through the first review stage will get a notice from us that they haven't been, you won't be continued in the pipeline for funding. Those who are will get a notice, and we'll try to coordinate a schedule for site visits. And site visits are an opportunity for us to learn more about your organization. The other thing that we do is we offer site visits as a volunteer opportunity. So we encourage participatory grant making, and which means we try to be very inclusive about who's making decisions about grants. So it's not just myself and Dominique. It includes some members of our board, other volunteers and committee members. And then each year we try to recruit additional community members to serve on our grant making committee. We call it the Community Investments Committee. And then once you make it through the site visit stage, we have a final review in January where that group comes together and makes decisions. And then we announce and notify you all in early February. And this is just a visual of that grant process for those who are more visually inclined. So there's the initial stage, there's the site visits and meeting stage. Since the pandemic, we haven't done any in-person site visits. This year we will play it by ear for those who are comfortable with in-person site visits, both the nonprofits and the volunteers, to see what's possible. And then there's the final round. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions, and then I'll go into the grant application, the specifics of the grant application. So let's check the chat, or you can raise your hand if there are any specific questions about anything I've shared so far. And I'll let the silence linger. I don't see any hands raised. I don't see any questions in the chat. Going once. All right. Yes. All right, questions. What if you don't have a physical office for a site visit? Well, that's great, because when all these virtual Zoom-based site visits that we've been doing, that works perfectly. So you don't have to have a physical office for a site visit. It can just be a virtual meeting. And really it's an opportunity to learn more about your organization. And often the other thing that I say is that site visits sometimes can feel performative. And, especially if you're a youth serving organization or you're serving a client base, you may feel pressure to, have someone come in and share a sob story. You don't have to share a sob story. You can share stories, but it doesn't have to be kind of emotionally triggering to compel us to support the organization. It's really about sharing what's comfortable, but yet not feeling like you have to put on a show for us. We try to be very mindful of the power dynamic of, grant making. So we want to make everyone feel comfortable and authentic. Any other questions? All right, so I'll move on into the grant application. So one of the things with us in terms of the grant application is we try to minimize what we call the application burden. So unfortunately, there are things that we have to ask because then we have to do some reporting. We have to really assess what's going on as well. We have the good fortune of having an outsized impact. We're a fairly small organization that does grant making that supports even smaller organizations, but yet our footprint isn't as large as other foundations. So we give less than $1 million per year, in grants. But we get over, I think we had over 100 applications last year from new organizations. We were only able to fund, I believe the new number was 16 last year. So that's not a high yield, right? That's less than 15% of the organizations that applied for a new grant made it through. Some were eligible to apply because they haven't received 5 full years of funding. But for the most part, most of those 100 organizations that applied were new. And again, only 16 last year, this year made it through. Just to give you a very transparent sense of how competitive, unfortunately, that it is. What we ask for includes basic organizational info like mission, contact information, where you serve. We asked about kind of number of people served, the structure of the organization, your budget, your board members, and the composition of your board. Are you fiscally sponsored, which means is there another 501c3 organization that you're using their status to receive donations? And then we have narrative questions. And the piece about the structure of the organization, we do ask some very specific and detailed information, which is probably the heaviest lift in the application. The narrative part are things that you already know, right? You know what you do well. We just want you to share with us what you do because we don't know who you are. But the structure can feel burdensome in terms of filling out this essentially a spreadsheet. It asks you for board information, numbers, but it asks you for demographic information and identity information. Some of that information you may not collect already. This may be your first time applying for a grant or not. But we felt it was important to include that level of detail because it allows us to have clear detail that we can then both aggregate and disaggregate in terms of reporting on the demographics of who's applying to us. But also we find that that's the same type of information that you're going to need when submitting other grants. So if this is your first time, it helps you get off to a good start in knowing what type of information you should be collecting so that you're able to kind of report with more specificity to other foundations. The narrative part includes, the narrative part includes things like your budget, staff, information, funders, who else are you receiving or applying for grants from. We ask for your profit and loss statements. For some of you, this may be a new thing. So like I can say budget, that makes sense. When I start talking about P&Ls, the profit and loss statements, your income statements, this may be new territory. So we ask for your profit and loss statements. You may have someone who's assisting you, you may have a bookkeeper, you may have someone in-house that does that. And then also with the board, we ask about number of years each person has served on your board as well. When applying for a grant, we have a pretty straightforward process on our website. We use a tool, a product called Foundit. It's our grant portal. So with Foundit, you need to create an account, and that's the web address there. It's accessible from our website currently. And essentially, if you're new to it, you'll create a new account. And Dominique is our resident tech expert who helps reset passwords to help folks kind of navigate how to use Foundit. There is a question about fiscal sponsorship. So does a fiscal agent impact the likelihood of getting funded in any way? And no, so it doesn't impact the likelihood, it doesn't hurt you or help you. The fiscal agent is just so that we know, who things are being addressed to. And then if an organization is fiscally sponsored, then it is essentially a project budget that we're looking at, because you may be fiscally sponsored by an organization that has a $15 million budget. It would raise red flags to us if you apply to us with a $15 million budget, because we have a $350,000 limit. So essentially you would need a project budget because your entity or program is a project or a program. So in that way, that's when we would need a program budget or a project budget versus an organizational budget if you're fiscally sponsored. But being fiscally sponsored doesn't hurt you or help you. If you are fiscally sponsored, do you need the financials from our project applying or the fiscal sponsor or both? We primarily need the project budget, or we don't need the organizational budget if fiscally sponsored. Because the other thing with our system, if you're fiscally sponsored, because there's a system of checks in that we have to award grants to nonprofits that have a 501c3 status. We just need to know which is called the EIN number you're using, but we don't necessarily need the fiscal sponsor's budget. Some other questions that usually come up. My organization's budget is over or nearing 350,000. What are my chances? So for us, that gets into that kind of tricky area. So often our review committee questions come up when organizations have budgets that are close to that threshold. We really do try to focus on small nonprofits, so it kind of depends. We don't always have a clear-cut answer, because it depends on what the slate of applications looks like for that year, what the average budget size is looking like, that we have to choose from and consider. But it likely hurts your chances the closer you are to that 350,000 threshold. What kind of technical assistance do we provide? I mentioned earlier, primarily the workshops, we call them seminars. We used to offer twice a year, kind of a longer one-day institute. We hope to bring those back, but in the meantime, we've been offering the seminars via Zoom. How much money should I apply for? So we don't prescribe what you should do. You know what makes sense for your organization. So, we give you the range of what we fund, and we give the average of what new organizations typically are awarded, which is 10,000 in the first year. And then you have, you can choose what you want to apply for. People often apply for the full amount. They say, oh, I want 10,000, I want 20,000. But then we kind of, based on what we have to balance in terms of consideration, we kind of determine a number. I see a couple of questions here in the chat. If the org budget is below 150,000, are you eligible to apply? Yes, we actually have organizations with budgets of 20,000 who've applied. So yes, you certainly are eligible to apply if the budget is less than 150,000. There's another question. Is there a specific budget format for this grant? So no, so we don't prescribe what your budget should look like. However, we can provide you a budget template if you need help in building out a budget, especially if it's your first time applying for a grant. So that's something we can provide, but we don't require a specific budget format. If your budget is significantly below 150,000, can we apply, and what are our chances? Again, you are eligible. It ranges. So your chances, it's a 15% chance just in general. So it's not necessarily based on your size. It's based on what you submit. One of the things that our committee looks for, because Dominique and I are part of those conversations, the range of things that come up. Sometimes people say, this was a really compelling application. It was very clear about what they're doing. They seem to have a very strong impact on a very specific community need, and seem to be, run and by people from the community being served, for an example. So it's not necessarily just about the budget size, but also kind of what you put in the application, how clear is it? Sometimes we get applications that aren't clear. We try not to penalize people who it becomes clear to us that this is something new to them, but we also look for kind of some clarity around, do we understand what they're talking about? Another question, are other funders share specific guidelines about salary and compensation ranges that they expect for grantees? Wondering whether you also have guidelines for staff salaries, hourly rate. No, so the straightforward answer for that is no. We don't have kind of expectations for compensation and salaries. We think you should put in the full cost of what it costs to run your organization. We think people should be paid, living wages. I actually just did a workshop a few weeks ago around pay equity for vendors. So are you also putting in your budget realistic estimated costs for independent contractors or consultants that you may be hiring to do a range of things for you? So while we don't prescribe any specific guidelines, we encourage you to put what it actually costs to run your organization. Another question, are you able to give feedback to applicants even if they are not awarded a grant? Yes, it is time consuming on our end, and yes, we do offer feedback. So when we send notification that organizations have not been funded, we do provide an opportunity to connect with us via phone or Zoom. And really what we do is try to summarize the comments from the reading portion of our review process, because every reviewer has to document kind of their rationale for their scoring, or if there are comments that come up in conversation amongst the committee when it meets as a whole, we try to compile and summarize that feedback and share it with the applicants. Can you explain further having little to no full-time staff as a grant guideline? So I guess I'm not sure what the question is asking, but some organizations are all volunteers. Some organizations have full-time staff. So we don't have a requirement whether it's volunteers or staff. I was just giving an example that the variety of organizations we support. Some are all volunteers, and there's one or two people who are the main staffers, even though they're unpaid. Okay. One of the other things you'll notice in our kind of guidelines is the budget should be board approved. So we do require that there's some sort of board that is providing oversight of the organization. So the budget should be board approved. If you're fiscally sponsored, typically you should have some sort of, if not a nonprofit board, like a board of advisors or a smaller group that's providing oversight of that program, because it's a part of that larger fiscally sponsored organization, but really it's like a separate thing. You're being incubated, but really it speaks to the idea of checks and balances. So it shouldn't just be an organization that has one or two people and there's no others providing checks and balances. Especially when it comes to finances and fundraising. So let's see, I see some more questions. Is there a cap on any public or government funding as a % of the overall budget? No, there's not. There are some organizations that get either city, state, or federal funding, but no, there's no cap on the percentage of that in your budget. And that was my last slide. So keep the questions coming. So does that mean the fiscal sponsor board needs to approve the budget? So yes. So if it's not, well, typically that's how it works anyway, because the fiscal sponsor should have approved the budget. But if it's not the full organizational fiscal sponsor, if there's essentially like a sub board or advisory group that's really providing oversight of the program or project, it should be approved by more than just the people who are building the budget. Well, I speak to the last two bullets on your FAQ slide. The last two bullets were, well, that last one I just did, the board approved budget. The last question is, my fiscal year ends June 30th. Do I need to send a year-to-date and a full year P&L? And there are some acronyms here. So FY just stands for fiscal year, Y to D, year to date, and P&L, the profit and loss statement. So the question is, my fiscal year ends June 30th. Do I need to send a year to date and full year P&L? No, because your fiscal year ends June 30th, you can just send that one P&L because you're applying, essentially by September 1st. So they essentially should match or be pretty close to each other in terms of what the actuals are. Do you know whether the budget template you provide is similar to the one provided by Philanthropy Mass? I believe so. Dominique, can you confirm?
Yes, both our demographic form and our budget form are the same ones used by Philanthropy Massachusetts.
And that's part of that whole, what I mentioned earlier, application burden. So if you're already familiar with the budget template that Philanthropy Mass uses, it will be very familiar if you wanted to use that one to apply to us. So that's the template we can provide, although we don't require it. Can you mention once again the number of applicants and number of awarded grantees in the last cycle? Certainly. So last year, in the summer of 2021, we had, I think, 113 applications from new organizations that were seeking to kind of enter our portfolio. And of that 113, I believe 16 essentially joined the portfolio this year. So that 16 was added to a group of 43. So in total, we have 59 organizations that are part of our portfolio. 43 were either in years 2, 3, 4, or 5 of their grants. And then that 16 this year was their first year, which is why I said it's less than a 15% chance, unfortunately. But it depends on how many people apply, how many organizations apply. We've gotten less than 100 applications some years. We got more than 100 applications last year. Other questions? Do current awardees apply in the same way for a second, third year grant? Great question. No. So that used to be the case. Organizations used to have to apply to us each year, even if they were kind of already a part of our portfolio. We've changed that as another step in minimizing the application burden. So essentially, there is an end of the year report for organizations that receive grants that essentially are summarizing, what you were able to accomplish and how the grant went for you in terms of our relationship. So as a part of that, essentially that grant report is essentially your renewal grant application. Some organizations share that, hey, in this last year we've grown and now we're a $500,000 organization, right? So that's the notice to us that, we got too big for you and we're going to move on. Or Some organizations don't submit anything, right? So they've been radio silent the whole year. They just went MIA, they don't fill out the report. And that tells us you don't want the second year of the grant because we never heard from you since. So it's really essentially that the grant report serves as the application for the renewal funding. Could you clarify your up to 5 years of funding? If I'm understanding correctly, is our initial application supposed to specify how many years of funding we are requesting, one time or multiple years? Thanks. No, so you don't have to specify. So your initial application is just for that first year of support. So you're applying for a 2023 grant, but basically it's the up to 5 years is us telling you that it could be renewed for 4 additional years. And I usually use the phrase, barring any exceptional circumstances. So your organization dissolves, which is the case with one organization that told us, yeah, we're shutting things down, or you grow, you get $1 million grant and, you're kind of beyond our range. Another question, we do not collect demographic information because we have high levels of anonymity and confidentiality and access to services. We have some ability to estimate, but is it okay to say we don't collect this information? So yes, and we don't necessarily look for the demographic information of who you're serving. It's primarily who's running it and who's governing the organization that we ask for. So it's primarily demographic information around staff and board. We just ask for numbers of people or families or individuals served. But there also is a place to specify we don't collect, this information, whether it's around gender or sexual orientation or disability status. That is an option as well. Other questions? And I'll stop sharing. Can we share a copy of this deck? Yes, this will be provided to everyone who participated, or everyone who registered as well. So you'll receive an email as a follow-up saying, this is the information that we shared. And we're also recording this, so it'll be on our YouTube channel as well. And essentially, if you already watched our YouTube channel, it's the same information as last year. But if you didn't, then we got a fresh one. All right, so it's 10:45, but if there are no more questions, we can wrap up early. And if you have an 11 o'clock, you can have a little break. I see a few familiar names, but thank you all for joining us. I hope you found this helpful, informative, and clarifying. We'll be in touch. You'll hear from Dominique via email with the slides, and look forward to reading your applications. Have a great day.